Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I am sitting down with Betsy Grimm. And I like to do a shout out if someone introduced me to my guest, and today that would be Libby Paul. So I'm super excited that she introduced the two of us. I am going to just read a little bit of your bio because I like the way it's written, and I think it's going to give the listener today an overview of who you are, that where you've studied, what you've done before we kind of, I think, funnel that down a little bit into a few topics. So Betsy Grimm is a somatic based practitioner trained in Hakomi mindful somatic psychotherapy. She is a yoga instructor with Kundalini and yoga for mood management, and she teaches meditation. Um, I love that you said, Betsy, her own anxiety, depression, PTSD, and blatant desperation led her to out of the way healing places her former self would have rolled her eyes at. That's
Totally.
that's so great. And then maybe lastly, her spiritual wanderings include yoga's rich breath work, mantra, meditative, and bhakti practices, as well as continuum movement, ecstatic dance, body work, sweat lodges, ritual guided work with sacred medicines, prayer, and deepening connections with nature. So you are well studied and more than you have so much to share today. Welcome, Betsy. Thank you for being here with me.
Oh my gosh, Maureen, I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yeah.
And especially because I'm meeting a new neighbor, a new sister. That makes
Uh-huh.
me so happy. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think we're probably just a couple miles apart. And
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
I
I'm
love
thrilled
that
that we've
too.
been connected.
I think that's just a great place to start, that there are more of us out there who are interested in having these conversations. And sometimes, I mean, we're in neighboring communities. We may have passed each other in the grocery store, on, the main street in town,
Right.
through the years and not even know. And I think that's the important of connections too, when we can connect each other in this sisterhood. Hey, I think you should meet, or it's really valuable to our growth as individuals and these communities.
I totally agree. That connection piece is so important. And
Mhm.
I really love what you're creating here is this community because yeah, that's been a big important driver for me, is really finding places where we can join together and where we can share our wisdom and also share our desperation and
Mhm.
share all the questions that we have too.
Yeah, such a good point with the wisdom and the desperation, because that's like, I never want to be bypassing the realness of life.
Mhm.
And there's so many great things about manifestation and abundance and all, this body of work. And we all come to the table with our life experiences, which are filled with joy and hurt, our wounded places, our traumas. So, that might be a good place to start, because before we got on, there's a lot of topics that we want to kind of weave our way through today. But I know anxiety and just this discussion around anxiety is maybe a great starting point. And because I don't know your story or why you care so deeply about this, would that be a comfortable place to start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my story is I'm a Midwest girl, grew up pretty conventionally and just kind of following the mold that culture laid out. And it actually looked pretty good from the outside. And then at age 40, my sister unexpectedly died. And it was just a complete unraveling for me. Part of it was the suddenness of it had an impact. And part of it was she was my everything. She was 2 years older and my only sibling. And I did later find out that it was PTSD that I was dealing with, but it was pretty extreme anxiety. And I did kind of jump into action. I was trying to care for her kids and for my parents and for my own kids as well. and trying to anyway. And yeah, I started to figure out like I need help here. And SSRIs would be helpful for a certain period, but they just didn't, that didn't sustain for me. And it was the beginning of my starting into cognitive behavioral work and sort of digging underneath things. And that was really powerful to sort of open up these areas that were just blind to me before, and really started my journey. But before her death, I had already had some experience with yoga. And I just kind of knew that this would be a place where I could find some relief. And so it became my lifeline. And I really appreciated these yogic communities that could support me and could offer other healing modalities too. But I can remember very specifically, I was in an Amy Weintraub workshop, and she works with yoga for mood management. And it was the first time where, in all of my kind of overwhelm, that I actually found my way to like some openness and found my way to myself. And it was the first time where I felt like, oh, here I am. And it was amazing. It was so striking, the difference. And later I knew like I had to become a yoga instructor, and that I would need to follow her work. And so that started to really help me understand some really basic, practical ways to work with my anxiety.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for that backstory and just your life story and what you went through and the PTSD and the trauma of it all. Um, and the, and just like, it feels like a gentle coming back to yourself, but those moments, that revelation that you had on that day and that time, I want you, if you can, because I feel like yoga is one of these things that sometimes, and I'll speak from my own experience, it always felt like the thing that I should be doing,
Mm,
that it was going to be, um, I feel like sometimes like the way people can approach yoga is like very dualistic. Like you're either doing it or you're not doing it,
mm,
if
mhm.
that makes sense. And so, um, I think it's a really good conversation to even say like, wow, what are the benefits of a yoga practice? And that seems like such a basic question.
Yeah.
But when you describe your own experience of like, even during those times that were so just probably dense and challenging to get through, what were some qualities that occurred in you, or what, like when you got to your mat, what did that provide for you?
Mm. Yeah, it's such a good question, and it makes me think. Well, first of all, that not everyone loves yoga, and
Mhm.
I'm always surprised at how many yoga teachers, when they talk about their first experience with yoga, they actually hated it.
Yeah.
And part of it is that we can bring everything, make everything quiet, and we have
Mhm.
to be with ourselves, and that means being with our thoughts. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I would love to talk about particular types of yoga that can meet more of the anxious mind, because, yeah, not all yoga. In fact, if you went into a yin yoga class, it might actually have you feel really stressed out and in your head, because there is so much spaciousness there. But yoga, how it works. I remember we were asked this in my first yoga training, and it was like, well, why does it work? And we all knew we'd had these experiences like, well, I don't know. I just feel so much better. And what is that? And it's funny because I still now I marvel at the people that come out of the yoga class before me, and they're just completely changed. And I always think it would
Mhm.
be really interesting to take pictures of people before they go into class and after they come out of class. How yoga works is really, it is a practice that helps us transcend the limitations of the mind.
Okay.
And that's a big concept, right?
Hmm.
And, we're used to the asana practice, which is so much about body and movement, but there's a whole lifestyle and philosophy piece to yoga it's pretty vast and deep. But that really at its base is what we're doing is we're learning how to work with our mind. And so, yeah, yoga can be uh, this place where we learn to step away from our thoughts and learn to become the witness to our thoughts,
Mm.
right? And that's a huge concept. That's a big thing. And that's part of, why meditation is so important, is to learn, oh gosh, I'm not that. And these thoughts just are right up on us. It's so hard to have that separation. But man, that is just such a skill to develop, is learning how to witness. And, on the laboratory of our mats, we can really practice that awareness. And you kind of have to, especially when you're starting yoga, and you really have to pay attention. Where are my feet? Where are my arms? There's all these ways you have to pay attention or you're going to
Yeah.
fall over.
Hmm.
Right. And but it's a great way to practice that and just watch your mind and be like, oh, look where my mind went. Oh, isn't that interesting? Right. And
Yeah,
then you
you
have to
can.
come back. Uh-huh.
I think too, as I've um, been adopting a practice recently, for me, it's almost like
Mm,
allowing um, the taking of an hour. I remember when I used to try it more in my 20s, all the classes seemed to be an hour and 15 to an hour and a half. And
mhm.
what I find now is there's more in that hour range that for me is more accessible.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
it's an allowance, and that it's almost like one of those things that if it doesn't catch for you the first time, maybe try different instructors too. Because I think you were going to say to the types of yoga can,
Yes.
depending on
Yes.
which avenue you go down. And we kind of talked about that Kundalini. And I recently heard about Kundalini and I was super excited. And I logged onto a site and kind of got on. They had a whole bunch of teachings and a couple weeks free, and it was so overwhelming. So to your point about how it can be, and then you had said like, oh, maybe you want to go this direction, Maureen, if you want to know more about that. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're bringing that up, and yoga, like how, even the timing of it can be important, and those hour and a half practices aren't as accessible for a lot of us. And the truth is that even 3 minutes, these 3-minute practices can really be worthy and really be helpful. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, we can kind of be creative at how we work with these different practices. And there are very different types of yoga and different ways to work with it. And yeah, I can talk more about some of the ways that are really helpful to work with anxiety, that more anxious mind, because it's actually quite different than how you'd work with a slower, more in the realm of tamasic or the depressed state. There's
Mm.
different
Mhm.
ways of working with it, and different modalities meet them in different ways.
Yeah, I love that. And so speaking to that, because when anxiety is with us, it's in our mind, but does it also settle into our nervous system and become kind of like a loop for us where we have that? Like before we met today, I don't carry a lot of anxiety. I think I did when I was younger. And I remember even the first time I had a ramp up towards, like, I don't know if it was a panic attack. I don't think it was ever, but I just remember when, and like you're saying, things can come up later in our lives. You had a traumatic loss event, and then I don't know how much anxiety was with you before that point, but I feel like that anxiety does live within the nervous system, because I think I have a lot of ways that I ground myself and steady myself. But this morning, I mentioned to you that I was in the DMV, and it was for my son's license, but I was sitting to the side and my body was just more flooded with a
Mhm.
memory. There was something there. I
Mm.
mean, that was
Mm.
definitely that operating. So is that with anxiety? And this obviously is like a straightforward kind of basic question too, but is that your experience, that we experience it sort of throughout our different bodies, our mind, our emotions, our nervous system?
Well, first, I just want to give you credit, Mama, because that driver's license thing is a rite of passage. And so I can understand why things were coming up for you.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about the anxious mind, and how it does get in the way from us really being more connected to
Yeah.
ourselves, and just the pattern, whether it's anxiety or not, the patterns of the mind that really can get in these ways of looping and can get stuck in these ways of looking at what we shoulda, coulda, woulda done, and get in these places of forward tripping that really get us out of the present moment.
Yeah, please,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
So anxiety, it's a big topic for me. My anxiety and I are tight. We've been hanging around each other for a long time. And one of the things that I think is important, as those of us who really do struggle with patterns of anxiety, is to befriend it and to know that this is actually very biological, and that our primitive limbic system, which is doing everything it can to keep us safe, right, is it's doing what it can, and that, it's not exactly the system that works best for our modern lifestyle. It was built to help us outrun a saber-toothed tiger, and we're not doing that so much anymore. And so one place to start with anxiety is just give yourself a lot of grace and
Mm,
see if you can, yeah, just find some self-compassion and understanding this isn't me, this is biology. And another important thing with anxiety is to remember that just because, and the sensations of anxiety are so strong, and they feel like an alarm in the body, but just because it feels like it's an alarm doesn't mean that it's an alarm.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's really important to recognize that my body's signaling doesn't actually mean that that's really as urgent as what it feels. I love this quote by Robert Fulghum, who says, "Don't believe everything you think," right?
Yes.
We could get really attached to that. And
Yeah.
when we have these sensations that are really strong, we can get, yeah, really connected that this is the truth. And so, one of the people that I love in her process, Byron Katie, she asks these 4 questions to help work with your thoughts. Yeah, you're smiling, Yeah. That is it true? Starting with that basic question. And that's a great place of inquiry. Are these thoughts, is it true? And then also, is it helpful? So, those are great places to start, and to recognize that the ways that we're getting stuck in these patterns of being in the past or being in the future um, really pull us out of the present moment. And that's why I love how Andrea Gibson, who's a great spoken word poet, they talk about how they talk about worrying, and they say the present moment is far more doable than the future or the past,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So that's why any of these practices that help us get into the present moment are so important for all of us, and particularly to interrupt that anxious mind.
Yeah. And I I love all the references that you just brought in there, that the work that has come before, or the quotes that remind us
Mhm.
of the present moment. But even with the Byron Katie questions of, is it true? Do I know it to be true? Um, I always forget the fourth one. I know, like, what would I be without that thought? I love those
Mhm.
because they allow us to, like you just said, witness our thoughts. And we believe we're our thoughts before learning ways to witness them. And when
Right.
we witness them, they I feel like it loosens up the grip a little bit. If we believe that we are those thoughts, then that's a hard pattern to break. But if we
I
be Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you
I
could,
love how you said that loosens up the grip. I think that's what it's about. It's like
mhm,
teasing out those spaces and getting more space between the thoughts.
yeah.
And then there's just more space for you, right?
Hmm.
And then you have a little bit more clarity. And the more you can tease that out, the better. So, yeah, I
Hmm.
very much resonate with that.
Yeah.
Um,
I was
and then I
gonna,
also, yeah,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say during yoga classes, I would love to experience your teaching at some point, but I know that yoga also gives the opportunity for the person experiencing it when the teacher brings their wisdom in. And it can be the most gentle reminder of setting an intention or talking about your thoughts and anxious loops, whatever it is that is sort of the theme of that class or that day. But it brings these reminders because we were talking before we started too about like how we can pull in all the books in the world. But sometimes I will read an entire book. And if you ask me a week or two later what it was about, I'd be like, I can't really give you a synopsis. But one of the I know one of the takeaways you wanted today for the listener was what are the simple things I can do? What are reminders that help me connect to myself? So,
Yes.
if you want to talk a little bit about that, like any things, and I know today you also were interested in leading the listener through
Yes.
meditation as well. So
Yes. I'm
either place.
excited to do
Mhm.
that. Yeah. Yeah. So getting practical with it, I would love to do that because the reality is how we frame our thoughts and how we think about our anxiety, that's important.
Mhm.
But or just how we think about whether it's anxiety or just the mind getting the best of us, right? That's really important. And for the anxious mind, it's like we can't quite think our way out of anxiety, right? We gotta, in my opinion, we gotta intervene and we gotta go to the body.
Yeah.
And so some
Mhm.
of the tips that are really important to me is one is to intervene early. And so before we get really, really amped up, and this is where witnessing helps to be able to recognize, oh, I see what's going on. I know that pattern in my body. I see, and to intervene. And one of the best, quickest ways to do that is to find our breath. And so, fear, which is at the root of our anxiety, it has a particular breath pattern. In fact, come to find out, all emotions have a particular breath pattern. So it's really interesting. Anytime that we just shift our breath pattern, we can help get us out of that emotional state. And with fear, the breath is up high and it's fast. It actually feels like we're not getting enough oxygen in, but it's not true. We are getting enough oxygen in. We're actually uh, depleting the carbon dioxide is actually more of a situation, but we've got plenty of oxygen coming in,
Mhm.
and it's this upper energy that is that has us kind of spinning in our head. And so one of my favorite breaths, and we can bring this in right now, is that navel breathing, that diaphragmatic breathing. And so I like to teach it that if you place your hand on your belly
Mhm.
and just let the inhale expand and puff up the belly so that you feel your hand move with the belly on the inhale. So each inhale, there's this puffing up the belly, and the exhale, the hand will descend. And sometimes that's harder for people. They're not used to it. And so it can be helpful to put your upper hand on your heart or on your upper chest and make sure that that hand isn't moving. You can kind of test yourself and just see if you can really concentrate on getting the breath down into the belly. We're actually bringing breath into the lower part of the lungs, and that flattens out the diaphragm, which puffs out the belly. And just that awareness, forget about the science of slowing the
Yeah.
breath down, because it does. You'll probably notice the breath is slower, but it also works with our awareness that when we bring our awareness to our bellies, we're getting out of the head, we're
Yeah.
bringing our awareness down, right? So
Mhm.
that is a quick one. And let's stay with it. Actually, you can stay with this belly breath. You can stay with it for the rest of the podcast. You can stay with it for the rest of your life. it's a good one. And this is one of my favorites. It's so darn simple. But especially when we get into things like panic attacks, where we're just not thinking as clearly, we're not in our prefrontal cortex. It's really good to have simple, simple, simple. So this simple tool, just place your hand on your belly and breathe into your belly.
Mhm.
So breath, yes, that is an important one for me. And then getting moving. So anxiety is a lot of energy, right? And that's why going into a yin class where you're lying down and rolling around, it's like, yeah, I don't know, that doesn't work for me. Like
Mhm.
to meet that with movement, meet it with some vigor, that's where I find that we can actually start to move some of that energy out. And so that vigor can come in yoga, can come in the form of sun salutations, but it can come in forms of, really doing some sweaty movement, playing tennis. Tennis is a great one because, again, you've got to use your awareness, use your focus, dance, right? Get yourself moving. And then there are particular ways that you can use your yoga to support that anxiety, whether it's with getting really into your legs, again, getting your awareness down, getting your awareness into your feet, and doing things like chair pose, doing things like balancing poses that take a lot of focus, really, really helpful. And then a big tip that I find incredibly helpful is getting into navel practices where we're really working our core. And my teacher, Kia Miller, who I can't say enough about her wisdom, but she is all about the core. And the belief is that if we are not strong in ourselves, how can we be with all this change and all this stuff that's happening in our environment? And so the practice of our times is about getting into the core.
Ooh.
And so, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, super important. So, yeah, getting into the body is great. And then also working with our energy system. And this is why I love the practice of yoga, is that it is working with our energy system as well as the body.
Yeah. I love that.
And let's face it, in anxious energy, or in most of the energy we're moving through the world with, we're kind of out fractured. Like we're out here, we're tending to this, we're looking at this, we're worried about this, and we're sort of outside of ourselves, right? And it's a really discordant energy. And so these practices that help to harmonize our energy, like yoga, to work with our energy in prescriptive ways, can be so fabulous. And that includes working with, body workers that have ways of helping our energy system come into balance, Reiki, whatever that is. But also just the simple task of grounding to the earth. So taking your shoes off, going out and connecting to the earth. Yes, it sounds hippie like, but the reality is that we are electrical beings, and right beneath us
Mhm.
is ground. And it's actually really important for our energetic systems to connect to it. And so we can bring our awareness to our feet. We can soak up the negative ions that are in the earth. And that is so important for to ground our energy. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, sorry,
Well,
yeah,
no. It's what I'm getting from a lot of this too is yes, you're kind of coming at it from the anxiety sort of, you know, lens, but
yeah,
then how important, even how you were just saying in these times and this discordant energy. And it's really kind of neat because I see it coming together as like, oh, wow, this isn't just a conversation about this conversation today. I can see like even Betsy, almost all the conversations that have been happening even through this podcast. It's just a reminder for everyone listening, a reminder to practice. Never has there been a more important time
mm,
because, and I'll have you go on to the next, and I'm curious about even lifestyle practices aside from breathing, movement. And I'm almost thinking like I love to have sort of sometimes a screensaver on my phone for whatever I'm working on at that point in my life. Um, like right now I'm doing a process with a group of people, the presence process. So mine says, I love myself unconditionally. You
Mm.
can't see it, but it almost, I feel like for people, oh, it's 11:11.
Mm.
For people who do experience anxiety, it's almost like it might be above someone's, design abilities, but having like a cheat sheet where you're saying that intervening
Mhm.
when you feel it coming on, when you feel it, that's so
Mhm.
important, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
like, and then you have like, okay, these 4 or 5 things I
Mhm.
can look to in order to calm me, because I do believe that it's in the moments, remembering,
Oh my
remembering,
gosh,
and
isn't
that
that the trick?
it's
Yeah.
practice,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
going back. So yeah, because
You
I know like a lifestyle one I do is really limit my news consumption
Mhm.
greatly as
Mhm.
to not take in that energy.
Mhm.
That's not for everybody, but yeah.
Well, I love, yeah, how you're working with this personally and just bringing up this idea of practice. And for me, that actually is something incredibly important to me is having a daily practice. It's something in the Kundalini lineage that they take very seriously. In fact, it might be that you work with the same type of practice for 40 days, where it could be extended, it could be your whole life, but this way of deepening into a practice is so important. It's like our body can, as we do it day after day, it's like it gets into a new groove. And what I find is it can just give you structure. And it's like you come back to this friend, okay, I can go do this thing and I can find myself again. And really, that's what these practices, all of them are about, is how we find these pathways back to ourselves. And when you can make that a regular part of your day, it kind of just simplifies things.
Hmm.
And in Kundalini, they do recommend that you do it first thing in the morning.
Hmm.
And the reasoning there is that it's like we kind of get ourselves in our body, we get our energy rolling and coherent, and then we can take on the day from a different
Yeah.
place. And
Hmm.
even just the idea of in the morning that we're just more connected to other realms. And so there's a way that morning time slot really works. And it doesn't work for all people, obviously. And there's always value in just sneaking in the little practices throughout the day.
Hmm.
But for those that are like, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly take
Hmm.
on daily practice, I understand that too. And I don't want to say, oh, this is something, this is an assignment you must add to your day. But I do find that when I'm grounded and find that pathway to myself, I am more efficient. I can be more present. I can meet people from a different place.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we want to think, oh, we don't have time for it. But I see it as like, well, actually, I think that it makes us just more efficient
Yeah.
throughout our day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can create that spaciousness.
Mhm.
And I think that's why it's good for the repetition of these messages, of the messages over and over from different voices and conduits. Because I was thinking the simplest of things, like fill your own cup first. You can hear it like, oh, I heard that 10 years ago first or 8 years ago. You know what I mean? But
Mm.
then the more you hear it, the more, and then
Mhm.
you begin to know, oh, that's really true. Maybe I wouldn't say it that way, or I don't like those particular words, but it's that self-nourishment and that really putting yourself first. And it makes sense to kind of honor yourself in the beginning of the day in order to I don't know, be able to give to the other parts of the day that you are required to, because we all have to, whether
Mhm.
it's a job or our kids or an aging parent,
Right.
that's there for us. So it seems really important to me.
Right.
Hmm.
Yep.
Hmm.
I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to share your breath practice today?
I do. And yet there's a couple more things just on
Yeah.
the anxiety front that I
Yeah.
can't not share because they've been so important to me. And again, because our mind gets stuck, it wants to stay in the mind, that I think hearing these ways to intervene can be really important.
Yeah.
And one of the things uh, about anxiety is a place we can really get stuck is that we can really feel alienated. We can feel all alone. Nobody gets it. And it's a feeling. It sort of feels like we're trapped. And so, yes, we can bring that anxiety to others, and we might want them to amp it up and meet us where we are. Like, oh my gosh, can you see this person? And we might want them to kind of stir up to our level. But what I suggest is not coming towards people with that energy, but rather with this very vulnerable energy. And you have to find the right people to do this with.
Yeah.
But to be able to reach out and just say to someone who cares about you, I am anxious and it is really hard right now.
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to reach out and touch someone and not have to have them fix it, but just to have them see that and hear that can change everything. And it reminds me of this story we heard in our Hakomi training about monkeys. There's a particular monkey that when they are under threat, that or after they've had some stressful event happen, that they will go and touch another monkey. And then that monkey touches another monkey, right?
Yeah.
And they're diffusing this energetic charge. And there's
Wow.
just something so incredibly beautiful in that, and such a powerful reminder. And just also in that place of touch and the power of touch, that if we can also find the person that can give us a hug, if we can ask for a hug and have a hug, we know there's science in how that can co-regulate our systems. We don't have to talk. It's just this feeling of touch and the way of being held and resting into that. So yeah, more hugs.
So beautiful. So beautiful. It feels like themes of safety and trust in there, and leaning in and receiving.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Knowing you're not alone.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know you've got your training in Hakomi, and you just mentioned it. Do you want to say, a little bit more about why it's so special to you?
I do, but maybe before we go there, Maureen,
Sure.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about Kundalini.
Beautiful.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, great. Kundalini is kind of its own breed of yoga. And so, yeah, we talked about, there are so many different types of yoga out there, and Kundalini is different than a lot of what we see, those Hatha and Vinyasa classes. And it is very much tied into how we work with the system, the energy system of the body, and how we bring ourselves into coherence. And we do it through these very interesting and sometimes unusual ways of using the body sort of as an instrument. And so you might be working with the breath in a particular way. You might be having the arms out at a particular angle. And in these kriyas, they're actually designed so that maybe for a couple of minutes you're working with one movement, and then the next couple of minutes you're working with a completely different movement. And it's all with this way in which we are systematically working with the energy systems of the body. So it's quite different.
Yeah.
And yeah, often we are trying to build the energy or stabilize the energy or direct the energy. And so through that, you can actually get really prescriptive about different effects that you're looking for. And so this is where Kundalini gets really interesting, is that they have different practices that can meet different needs. And that could be anything from anxiety to feeling foggy in your head. There's actually a kriya that's really helpful for Alzheimer's, that's been proven to help with Alzheimer's. There can be detoxifying kriyas, ones that build confidence, that have that emphasis at the navel, self-love, emotional balance. There's all these different ways that you can actually kind of shop for just the right practice that meets you. Yeah. So it's quite different and it's a little odd, but to me, it's sort of like supercharging your yoga practice And so for me, because of my high anxiety, there's a way that that has met me in ways that other yoga hasn't.
Really beneficial. Is it easy for people to find practitioners or yeah.
I can make it easy for you because I have a teacher that has that I couldn't recommend more highly. Her name is Kia Miller, and she has her classes on Glow, which is a subscription site. It's glo.com. And she has hundreds of these, and you can search on them depending on what you're looking for. And she really, truly is just a masterful teacher. She has gone deep into her own practice and into her studies of Kundalini. And yeah, she has everything to do with sort of my evolution as a student and as a teacher.
Okay. Thanks for that share. That will be really beneficial. Awesome.
Right.
Yeah. So where would you like to go from there, do you think? I didn't know if you wanted to jump into the breath practice.
Yes, this would be a great time to do that. Thank you. So yeah, let's do the little practice here. I'll break out, there's so many, and this is where it gets hard for me because there are so many good ones to choose from, but I thought I'd pick one that we can do with the group, and this can work for people that are even driving in their car or doing whatever you're doing.
Okay.
And this breath, my teacher Kia Miller calls this the anti-insanity breath. So
good name.
It's very practical breath, and yeah, it's pretty portable. You can take it with you. And so maybe before we get started with this breath, we can just start to find our way to our seat. And if you are driving, you can, do this driving, but if you can sit on something that kind of gives you a firm base underneath you so you can find that tall spine, that's great. We're again working with the anatomy of the body, sort of the instrument of the spine here. And we're going to work with mudra. So the mudra, the hand position, is this left palm is going to come and face the heart, and the left elbow is kind of winging out to the side. Yeah. And then the right hand is going to be placed on the back of the left hand. So both palms are facing you, right palm on top of the left palm closest to the heart, but not touching the heart, maybe about, 4 inches away or something. And then the thumbs connect. So this is how specific Kundalini gets. And then if you can get the arms so that they're parallel to the ground, so the forearms are sort of in this parallel line, that's great.
So if someone's driving, they can just do the breathing part.
Yeah, just good point. Just do the breathing part. And there is also a position or a drishti, gazing point for the eyes. And so obviously if you're driving, keep your eyes open.
Yeah. Listen and come back.
That's right. So actually the drishti is to look down towards the tip of the nose, which is very funky and weird. It kind of has a little bit of a cross-eyed feeling to it. But this is, again, very prescriptive in the way it's working with the optic nerve and putting some pressure on the pituitary gland. So all that said, we'll start to bring in the breath here. And if, it makes your eyes crazy, just let that go and do your best. But the breath is taking an inhale. It's all through the nose. And then pause at the top of the inhale. And then exhale and pause. And then cycle again as you inhale. Pause for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 counts. And then exhale. And try to pause for that same amount. So we'll continue that pattern, inhaling and pausing. Exhale and pause. And here's where you can start to lengthen that pause if it feels available. So I like to say kind of make it interesting, make the pause interesting. So you're stretching it out a bit, but not so much that it's like you're gripping. And so you can stretch it out. Maybe it reaches as far as 10 counts, but you make it work for you and try to keep the pause at the top of the breath and the bottom of the breath the same. And this pausing of the breath has a fabulous way of just interrupting our automatic cycles. And so we have this opportunity as we pause to actually kind of wake up and pay attention. So be with that little paying attention. It's available, this kind of breaking off automatic. And you can pay attention to notice if you sort of are gripping in the pause. And if you are, just see if you can find some gentleness there. It's almost like you're just cupping a butterfly. So stay with that gentle pause, stretching it out for as long as it's interesting and comfortable. And then trying to keep it the same at the bottom of the exhale as well. And if you've lost that little eye gaze, sometimes we forget about it, you can bring that back in, or maybe want to disregard that. That's great too. We'll just be here for a little bit longer. We're going for 3 minutes here. 3 minutes can really make a difference in our nervous system. And so see if you can stay with yourself and just notice when you move away from yourself, when the thoughts take you away. And then just use the breath to guide you gently back to yourself. And then to finish our practice, we'll inhale together and find that pause at the top of the inhale. And if you know Mula Bandha, so that's that lifting up of the pelvic floor, it's a little Kegel exercise. You can bring that in, and that draws energy upwards to the center of the head. And then exhale, you can release the arms down and just release the breath so that you're finding its natural, or it's finding its natural rhythm. And you might notice as you release the breath that there is more just smoothness to the breath. It's a little smoother, a little deeper, a little longer. And here's where you might also notice the thoughts, and whether the thoughts might be coming at a different pace, a little slower, a little more space between the thoughts, and a little bit more space for you. And so if you're feeling more of the you, or the deeper you within you, pay attention, notice that. You can even say, hi, you.
Mhm.
Because this is really what all these practices are about, is finding this deeper connection to ourself. And in fact, we often close our practice with the sound Sat Nam. And Sat Nam is this way of recognizing that at the essence of ourselves, at the core of ourselves, is truth. So we say Sat Nam,
Satnam.
Sat Nam.
Mm.
Yeah.
So beautiful and calming, and it just feels really like luscious, or it just
Mm.
like a luxury, right? But our breath should not be a luxury, because it's with us. But we get so far away from it that when we do the practice, it's like, oh wow, no, it's actually part of me. Are there also I feel very calm right now, so thank you for that.
I'm
Are
glad.
there also, for those, either whether you're experiencing anxiety more often, and even if you're not in that form, like you were saying earlier, our minds are on overdrive a lot. Are there phrases or, mantras that you use to come to yourself as well?
Mm.
Mhm.
I happen to love these mantras that are in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is such a amazing language in the way it works with kind of the anatomy of sound. So even the ah, om, the way the ah is in the back of the throat, the o is at the center, kind of opening up the throat, the at the lips. It has this resonance, and yet for a lot of people, these Sanskrit words, they're not familiar, and so it can be really nice to just have English words that are meaningful. And
Mhm.
so you can simply work with mantras like "I am peace"
Mhm.
or "I am love,"
Yeah.
and you can create your own mantra for
Mhm.
whatever it is that you're working with, just something that helps bring you to yourself.
Yeah. I always think of I am safe, or
Yeah.
I what comes to mind is I can trust myself, or I trust myself.
Mm,
I
that's so
have
nice.
I have resources.
Yeah.
I and I recently heard, I had never really heard this kind of work either being referred to as resourcing, or to feel resourced, or to be resourced is to be able to tap into these kind of skills and tools that we
Yeah.
can just use on the daily basis. So
Yeah.
I think what you've offered today is so incredibly just beneficial and helpful. Um, Talking about it from so many different lenses of, yeah, the topic of anxiety and our mind, but then the practices that are really, they're really pretty accessible and practical,
Mm.
Betsy.
They're just right there,
Yeah.
especially the
Hmm.
breath. It's just right there. It's just a matter of remembering.
Hmm.
Um, and as we talk about mantra, maybe I just want to bring in this one other thought around that, because this is such a lovely one to work with, is just the sound mm.
Hmm.
So vibrates the lips. And this is what is always so crazy about this yoga practice, is that these yogis figured this out thousands of years ago before they knew anything about polyvagal theory, right?
Hmm.
But somehow they knew that these sounds, which does affect the vagal nerve, are calming. And so just
Wow.
that sound,
Mm. Mm.
we sometimes do that naturally, really calming. And then I'll mention one other sound I just have been working with lately that I love for bringing more clarity to the mind. It has a very different sense of the way that it feels in the body. And it's very similar. It sounds similar to Om, but it's Om, O-N-G, Om,
Mhm,
and it
mhm.
vibrates the crown. So Om, just singing that
Um,
5 times, Om,
mhm.
can really help bring some clarity to the mind.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for all of the insight, the wisdom, and the walkaway tools today. It's amazing.
You're so
Um,
welcome.
as we wrap up, I don't know if you've got anything else you would like to add before we kind of share with the audience where to find you.
One thing that I thought to mention, because as women and many mothers, I'm sure, are listening, just talking a little bit about worry,
Hmm.
worry of our kids. You're nodding, right? Like it's
Yeah,
sort of, yeah, how do
yeah.
we not get stuck there? And so, in this place of worry, just a couple points that might be helpful. Um, One is to recognize that fear of our kids' safety is biological,
Hmm.
and it's how we're wired, right? It helps us keep our kids alive.
Yeah,
And so one of the things about worry is to just give yourself grace. Like, yeah, I'm a mom. Of course I'm worried. And
yeah,
just you can talk to yourself and be like, yeah, I understand. And also do that check in of like recognizing that what our biology is telling us, even though it sounds like an alarm, that it might not be an alarm, right? And you can do that, kind of looking at these thoughts that you're worried about, just as we talked about with Byron Katie, and sort of looking at like really, what is my fear here, and is it true? Um, but one of the things that I can't stress enough is just this idea of self-care.
hmm,
And we know this again and again. You mentioned it, putting on the oxygen mask first. But when we are more in ourselves, when we can access more of our bandwidth where we can access our higher self, we're parenting from a different place than from this place of worry. And our kids do feel it and they pick up on it. And we definitely don't want to bring to our kids like, oh, you're making me worried and I'm scared. And this energy that we want them to fix us, we need to show up to them as like, I've got me and I can help you too. And so that way in which like really feeling grounded in ourselves is the work. And we can always come back to that. And then there is this worry practice, and I'll put a link to that I really like. It actually involves drinking water because water is so helpful for the emotional balance of the system. And then just taking that step back from the parenting role to recognize that, you know, our kids are going to have their own path and that we can't control it and we can't fix it all. And to recognize that they're going to work through their own path just as we will too. So,
Oh, and it reminds me of what is in my control and what's out of my control, and what's in our control are the practices, are
yeah,
the choice to come back to ourselves, the choice. But I'm happy that you pointed out the worry, because that's another real thing, the real thing that we experience. And, you know, even if we try to, you know, I think bypass it and, you know, even go to positive thinking or what, try to, I do feel the biological part of it. And it's reminding me, go in for the hug for that too,
oh my
because
gosh, yes, right.
we all do carry a lot around. If the listener is a parent, is a mother, and even if we're not a biological mother, we are mothering others. So we need to go in for that hug and that support, and also give it to ourselves.
100%. Yes, that
Love
is
that.
the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you for everything. And where can our listeners find you if they go to look for your work?
Yeah, so my website is betsygrimm.com. I also am on YouTube with some of these tools, Betsy's yoga tools. You can find me there. And I'll put some link into some of the specific tools that I recommend. And yeah, I think that's it.
That's great. I'll
Yeah.
link everything in the show notes, and I'll try to go through my transcript and just pull out everything and everyone, Kia and Byron,
Mm.
Katie, and just everyone we mentioned today, so
Oh,
people
that's
can
great.
find the resources. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's great.
Okay.
You know,
Um,
Maureen, I
yeah.
don't know if we have time for this or not, but there's this kind of umbrella notion that has been on my mind and what I've wanted to share. And
Mhm.
so, again, I don't know if there's time to talk about this, but there's something that's really helped me that just kind of guide my way of thinking about my life and finding these ways in which we find the pathway back, you know, whether it's through our yoga practices where we find these glimpses of ourself where we're like, oh, these places where it's like, yeah, here I am.
Mhm.
And it came from this poem. It's really sort of a prayer that Pixie Lighthouse says, where she talks about healing places. And what she says is, teach us to see, read the tracks, and follow the markings that lead us to the healing places.
Mhm.
And it's when I heard that, because I was already doing that, but I wasn't really even recognizing that that actually can be sort of a way in which we navigate our whole lives. Like we can create our whole life around finding healing places. And what a different world it would be if we all oriented around
Mhm.
healing places,
Mm.
right? And there's so much out there. There's just so many vast ways to find healing and find that pathway back that can be just as simple as
Yeah.
the breath, right?
Yes. Thanks for, I mean, that's such an invitation for people, and that discovery of the things that will speak specifically to you, to each of us, right? There might be overlap, but it's going to look distinctly our own too. And that's the beautiful blend that you brought today. And you do bring is everything that you've pulled in together at paired first and foremost with your experiences and what you really came to teach and offer to people and to cultivate within yourself. I mean, it's just such beautiful work, and thanks for doing it and being here today with us, because it was just a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Oh, well, it's such a pleasure to be here and to be with a mystical sister. It really lights my heart up. It's been a
Yes.
pleasure.
Yeah, I loved our conversation.
Yeah,
So
me too,
we
Maureen.
will continue it in the future. And yeah, to our listeners, thanks for being here. Share with a friend if you have someone in your world that would benefit from any part of this conversation. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.